The World Skeptics Congress, Paranormal, Supernatural, Fringe Science, Pseudoscience, and How It Really Is. Berlin welcomes you.
We will start with Jeannie Scott, and I almost wonder whether I have to introduce her at all, because she is known worldwide for her work related to science education. She has the National Center of Science Education in the United States, of which she is the director. And she has recently also taken on education as far as the topic of climate science is concerned, also into the overall portfolio of the organization. And she is, of course, well known as a speaker and a writer and an author about all topics related to creationism and to the defense of science education in schools, but beyond that as well. So, Jeannie Scott, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, Amadeo. I am delighted to be here at the 6th World Skeptics Conference. It's so wonderful to have these international meetings again. I was asked to talk about creationism internationally as well as in the United States, just to sort of set the table, as it were, for the next symposium that we're going to have, as well as give you an introduction to this rather, to me anyway, quite interesting topic. Well, creationism is usually considered an American, or especially North American, controversy, but it is spreading internationally as conservative Christian missionaries use creationist literature in their missionizing activities. Its spread, as one might expect, is also influenced by the idiosyncrasies of culture, politics, and national pride. I'll try to give you some examples of this, although because there is a separate session on Islamic creationism, I'll use examples other than from predominantly Islamic countries. Islamic creationism is, however, a major creationist force internationally. Anti-evolutionism, whether in the US or internationally, tends to reflect what we call the pillars of denial, the framework that those who deny the scientific consensus use to promote their views. The first pillar is to challenge the validity of the science. It is claimed that either the science is weak or that scientists are still debating whether evolution happened, whether climate change is happening, whatever. The second is an ideological pillar. Evolution or global warming must be rejected because it's not compatible with some ideological view. With evolution, of course, the ideological view is a religious ideology. It is not compatible with Islam, with Christianity, with whatever. In the case of climate change or some other controversies, there may be a political or an economic ideology that keeps the science from being properly heard. And finally, the third pillar reflects cultural values. In American society, these cultural values are things like fairness, free speech, balance, and particularly recently, the idea that the teaching of a balanced view of evolution promotes critical thinking of students. Let the students decide for themselves. Clearly, fairness and balance are important for public discussion of many political and social issues, and I certainly would want to have a balanced view be presented of many of the important issues in American society that we have to decide upon. But it's not really relevant to what should be taught in science class. Science is not a democratic process. It is a meritocratic process. And the balanced view, as it were, the debate that takes place to decide whether a particular scientific explanation better explains the natural world, that does take place, but it takes place within the scientific community. And only after that debate has taken place and a consensus arises is an idea that is suited for the science classroom evolves, so to speak. And that is the process that we should be encouraging. We shouldn't have to have 10th graders deciding whether or not the planet is getting warmer. We shouldn't have to have 10th graders or elementary school students deciding whether the Earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the Earth. Those are issues that the scientific community has already discussed, has already debated. The fairness has been exercised, shall we say. Well, international comparisons on the acceptance of evolution are not numerous. This one from 2006 asked adults in 23 countries the question, humans evolved from earlier species of animals, true or false? This is a blow-up of that illustration. The United States scored particularly low, only scoring higher than Turkey among the countries surveyed. Consider how children learn about creationism or evolution. The primary place where children learn about creationism is at home or in religious establishments, in churches, synagogues, or mosques, reflecting different religious traditions. Children learn about evolution primarily in schools, which might be government-run or private. I want to talk about creationism first, where religious traditions play the largest role, and I will begin with the United States. In the United States, most of the citizens are Christian, with Protestant Christianity being the single largest division. In this 2006 survey performed by Baylor University, Protestants comprise roughly 62% of Americans, with evangelicals, conservative Protestants, comprising approximately 39%. Conservative Christians are the ones who seem to have the greatest difficulty reconciling evolution with their faith, and conservative Christianity forms the foundation for evolutionism, anti-evolutionism in the United States. The Christian doctrine of special creationism is not compatible with evolution. Special creationism is the religious view that God created all things in their present form. The universe encompassing the solar system to all the galaxies, living things on Earth, everything in the universe was created in pretty much their present form. Evolution, of course, is the concept that the universe has emerged gradually over time, changing cumulatively over billions of years. Biological evolution is a subset of evolution, proclaiming that living things descended with modification from common ancestors. Evolution obviously is not reconcilable with special creationism, although special creationism is only one of many Christian views. Creationism in the United States is found in two varieties: young earth creationism and old earth creationism. Young earth creationism being the more familiar form, where believers believe that the earth is only thousands of years old, 6,000 or 10,000 years old, and everything was specially created. Old earth creationism, at least accepting the physics and the chemistry and the geology of modern day science, accepting that the earth is millions or even billions of years old, the universe is billions of years old, but still special creationism is the belief governing biological variation. God still specially created the organisms in their present form. Most forms of old earth creationism have this creation event occurring over time, but it's still special creationism. Intelligent design is a more recent form of creationism which overlaps the other two. It doesn't make many of the fact claims that you find in young earth creationism, sometimes called creation science. But it also includes people who, it's the big tent, shall we say, including both young earthers and old earthers. There are many organizations promoting anti-evolutionism in the United States, both of young earth creationism and old earth creationism, as well as intelligent design. And these groups, many of them have spread internationally. The young earth creationism or creation science groups produce large quantities of literature, instructional materials, videos, and other publications. They operate mostly at the grassroots level, inspiring conservative Christians to reject evolution as a religious duty and to discourage others from accepting it. They believe that acceptance of evolution will lead to the abandonment of faith, so they oppose it being taught in schools. There are somewhat fewer intelligent design organizations, but they strengthen the anti-evolution movement in different ways. They have worked more openly at the state level, trying to influence state science education standards and proposing legislation to state legislators that would negatively affect the teaching of evolution. Let's turn now to the second factor, the structural factors affecting the teaching of evolution in the United States. Governmental policies vary and affect how schools are run and what is taught. In the United States, the federal government makes grants to states with strings attached in various ways. The money is earmarked for use for, say, disadvantaged children or remedial education or some other purpose. The states, in turn, distribute money to distribute some of the funds to local districts. But the bulk of the money for schools is raised in the local districts, usually through property taxes. So there is often great discrepancy among districts where poor areas don't have as much money to spend as wealthier ones, though there have been court decisions attempting to remedy the situation by requiring the state government to provide supplemental money to poorer districts. But the key factor to understanding the creationism problem in the United States is to recognize how decentralized and politicized the U.S. educational system is. There are approximately 15,000 independent school districts in the United States, and instruction is largely determined there. Here is where decisions are made what to teach, who will teach, how much instructors are paid, and so forth. Decentralization distinguishes the U.S. educational system from most other developed nations, where there generally is a centralized curriculum and more continuity of instruction from school to school. There is, in contrast, much variation from school to school and district to district and state to state in the United States. Evolution is not taught consistently from state to state, and we find that there are teachers that simply omit the subject because they consider it too controversial. I love this map. It's almost a map of river systems in the United States, if you know anything about our geography. School boards govern these local districts. They are elected bodies, and where you have elections, you have politics. As a result, education in the United States tends to be highly politicized. There is also a tradition in the U.S. of local political participation. In this picture, you can see citizens holding signs at the school board meeting and a citizen presenting her opinion at a podium to the members, to the decision makers. It's also the case that schools are where a great deal of socialization and enculturation goes on, and this is true in any country. So people who feel very strongly about social issues are often very concerned about what children are taught in schools and work to get people sharing their views elected to school boards. Perfectly legal procedure, of course. It's just normal grassroots politics. But oftentimes the decision makers are elected by the people who feel most strongly. And one of the interesting phenomena about United States education is that these elected school boards tend to be elected by a minority of the registered voters. School board elections tend to be kind of far down the ballot. And by the time people make their way down through the ballot, they either don't know who those candidates are or they're tired and they just quit. So I think just about every school board in this country is elected by a minority of the potential voters. Now, the most highly motivated minorities are often religious conservatives. And although they are a minority in the community, they have a disproportionate influence in elections if moderates and liberals don't vote. If you were an American audience, I would tell you to inform yourself and get out and vote. If you're not going to inform yourself, stay home. I'll vote for you. As a result, there are many controversies regarding the teaching of evolution arising at the local school board level, and they can be very contentious, splitting communities and disrupting community harmony. There also are state boards of education, which most often are elected, although some are appointed, and which are sometimes pressured by citizens to enact measures that either introduce some form of creationism or in some other way compromise the teaching of evolution. Most of the controversies at the State Board of Education level have to do with citizen pressure to get evolution out of the state science education standards or to get some form of creationism in. Science education standards are documents that are intended to shape the curriculum of local districts. They are not strictly mandatory, although state boards usually attach strings to money from the state in ways that encourages local districts to adopt the state standards. Up until now, each state has derived its own standards, which means there is much variation from state to state. And I said up until now because right as we speak, there is a process going on in the United States to establish national curriculum standards. This is not a national curriculum, which is greatly misunderstood by the religious conservatives, religious and political conservatives in the U.S. These are state standards that would then guide state in developing curriculum for the actual classroom. This process began actually several years ago, and states would agree in advance to sign on to the national standards. We have passed standards in English language arts and in mathematics. These were drawn up by professional boards, by master teachers and relevant experts in math or English. And in the United States, I think it was 48 states signed up for the English and the math standards. So there will be some continuity of curriculum, which is a great idea. The science standards are under development right now, as I speak, in May of 2012. Only, I think, 26 states have signed on to adopt the science standards. And I think you can pretty much predict that the reason why so many fewer states have pre-signed, as it were, to the science standards is because of the issue of evolution and the issue of global warming, which are highly politicized in the culture, if not in the scientific community. So many states are waiting to see what the national science standards, the new, as they call them, next generation science standards, say about these controversial issues before they are adopted. They're not going to be happy because there's plenty of evolution and there's plenty of climate change in these new standards. But up until now, each state has been responsible for deriving its own standards, and although there's some continuity from state to state, states vary considerably in how well evolution and other subjects are covered. The Fordham Foundation has ranked states on how rigorous the standards are, and few states get the highest grades. The coverage of evolution was one measure in the Fordham evaluation, a state being downgraded if evolution is poorly covered. And you can see that there are an awful lot of gray states there. The politicization of education goes beyond local and state school boards to state legislatures, which annually introduce legislation aimed at compromising the teaching of evolution in some way. Most of these, fortunately, do not pass. Before court decisions declared them unconstitutional, there were efforts to require the teaching of Christian creationism in the schools, the teaching of something called creation science, and also the teaching of intelligent design were also proposed and failed in the courts. Current legislation, such as these bills proposed just this year in 2012, is more subtle. It calls not for the teaching of creationism, not for the teaching of intelligent design, but for the teaching of the evidence against evolution, or the strengths and weaknesses of evolution. When I am giving presentations, general public presentations at a university campus, I'll often ask, how many of you are scientists? And a bunch of hands will go up. I say, okay, let's say I'm a teacher, and I am in Tennessee, where they just passed one of these bills. And I want to come to you to get a list of the weaknesses of evolution, which I can then teach next Monday. Can I come to your office and you'll reach in a drawer and give me the list? And they all laugh, because that's silly. There aren't weaknesses of evolution any more than there are weaknesses of gravitation. This is just not, this is a totally political kind of issue. The idea here is to present evolution as if it was a weak scientific idea in hopes of discrediting it in the eyes of students. Let me summarize the factors affecting anti-evolutionism in the United States. Religious opposition, that of conservative Christians, is a major force in the anti-evolution movement. The decentralization and politicization of education is another very important issue. And of course, there is a very influential and active anti-evolution movement. Even though religious conservatives are a minority of the population, they're a noisy minority, and they have a disproportionate effect upon science education. Now let's take a look at international creationism, and where we will see some similarities and some differences. In international anti-evolutionism, what we find is evangelistic Protestantism is on the rise around the world, particularly, by the way, in Russia and in the former Soviet Union countries. The internationalization of the creationist ministries is also another contributing factor. Answers in Genesis, particularly, which began as an Australian organization, moved to the United States, hit it big, and is now expanding and improving and building up their international offices. Creationism is often an expression of culture and politics internationally, and I'll try to give you some examples to illustrate that. And of course, just as in our familiar pillars of denial, fairness or balance is often attractive in other countries in addition to the United States, which is of course misguided when it comes to science education. The local control of education in the United States is contrasted with the top-down nature of educational systems elsewhere, which can result in much more rapid changes. And the examples that I will give you tend to be situations that came up and down pretty quickly, and I'll give you an example of that. The first example I want to use is of Italy. In February 2004, the Minister of Education, Letizia Moratti, took evolution out of the middle school. This was geological evolution, biological evolution, human evolution, and culture. Evolution would be taught in high school, but primarily as something to be criticized. The justification was first made that middle school students were too young to understand evolution, so the topic would be dropped. Also, the criticism of evolution in high schools was couched in familiar terms. This would teach students to be critical thinkers. Scientist and teacher organizations protested. The Prime Minister apparently put pressure on the Minister of Education, and by the end of April, she had withdrawn the policy of dropping evolution, and like a good bureaucrat, had appointed a commission to draw up a policy to evaluate the situation. Now, I mentioned that oftentimes creationism or anti-evolutionism is a function of politics and culture. In Italy, anti-evolutionism was promoted by right-wing politicians who equated evolution with Marxism. But unlike in the United States, Italy has a top-down educational structure, so change can take place quite quickly. This was sort of a trial balloon. It lasted only a few weeks before the Prime Minister clamped down on it as a result of public pressure. A similar situation occurred in Serbia, also in 2004. Ljiljana Kolic, the Serbian education minister, ordered that evolution no longer be taught in the biology course for 14, 15-year-old students, and said that evolution would not be taught in future years unless given equal time with creationism. Kolic, an Orthodox Christian, reportedly said that, quote, Darwinism is a theory as dogmatic as the one which says God created the first man. Both the press and Serbian academics raised a fuss, and the Prime Minister reversed the decision. Also raising a fuss were a number of political parties in opposition to the one then holding office. Claims were made that the decision was made in order for political conservatives to curry favor with the Orthodox Church. However, a prominent bishop of the Serbian Orthodox Church proclaimed that, quote, Darwin only spoke about ways that humans and the rest of nature are connected. The connection must not be ignored by anybody, even by us theologians. The cartoonists were not kind. Here's a cartoon where Kolic is seen kicking Darwin down the stairs. I don't know why Darwin's holding a chimp, I don't know, whatever. Kicking Darwin down the stairs, but notice the retreating gown of a Serbian Orthodox priest disappearing into the... So politics, local identity is often tied up with creationism and anti-evolutionism, just as in the United States. Brazil is another example. Brazil was solidly Catholic until the last 20 years or so, but there has been a great deal of evangelical Protestant missionizing, and the popularity of the Catholic Church has declined. Reportedly, this popularity suffered with the abandonment of liberation theology by the Vatican, and now evangelical Protestants compose somewhat more than 15% of the population, and this percentage is increasing. In 2002, the governor of Rio de Janeiro state, Anthony Garotinho, introduced religious instruction into the classroom. Catholic and Protestant religious teachers were hired by the state to teach religion. In the summer of 2004, his wife, the current governor of Rio State, Rosina Mateus, set forth a policy that would require that creationism be taught alongside of evolution in state schools. Now, apparently this is to be, Google Translator is not perfect, and so I confess that I don't read Portuguese or much of anything else other than English. And so I'm not as well versed in this situation as perhaps I might be, but my understanding is that instruction is supposed to take place in the religion classes. There is some question whether this is allowed under the federal non-establishment provision, non-establishment of religion provision, which requires religion to be taught about rather than taught confessionally, rather than advocating religion. You can discuss it comparatively. And so there was a debate going on as to whether this new prescription permitted that. There was a great uproar from scientists, but to my knowledge, this policy still holds. I want to turn to Russia now. Levitt and colleagues in this article from Reports of the NCSE discuss how after both perestroika as well as the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia acquired translations of creationist books popular in both the US and Europe, especially from Protestant Christians. Russian Orthodoxy is the most common religion in Russia, with about 60% of Russians claiming adherence to this faith. Now, this may not involve actual practice of the faith, so much as identification with the Russian Orthodox Church for cultural reasons as symbolic of Mother Russia. Just this year, in 2012, it was announced that the Russian Orthodox Church culture will be taught in the public schools, architecture, literature, history, etc., although supposedly not the ROC creeds. Patriarch Alexei II has come out against evolution as being unchristian, and the Russian Academy of Sciences has protested this as blurring the lines between church and state. In any regard, there's ample access to creationist writings in Russia, and both the ROC and minority Protestants support special creationism as part of their ideology. In 2006, a 15-year-old high school student from St. Petersburg, Maria Schreiber, sued the Ministry of Education because she claimed science instruction in her school was too one-sided. An alternative to evolution should be offered. The judge ruled against her, but not before the Minister of Education, Andrei Fursenko, made soothing noises about welcoming the teaching of alternative ideas in school. This propensity of educators and administrators to try to appease creationist parents, or perhaps just make problems go away, by teaching both evolution and some form of creationism, that third pillar of denial, is very popular in the United States and attractive in many parts of Europe and obviously Russia, given cultural beliefs in fairness, justice, and so forth. In summary, then, factors affecting international anti-evolutionism. Indeed, evangelistic Protestantism has been expanding around the world, even in places like South and Central America and the Philippines, where formerly there had been a stronger, more moderate form of Christianity, Catholicism, which is not automatically resistant to evolution. Also, conservative Christian religion is on the increase in Europe and Great Britain, though these societies are still predominantly secular in their orientation. Creationist ministries such as Answers in Genesis have indeed expanded internationally, and there is a nascent intelligent design movement on their heels. These are still not very strong, however. But there's much idiosyncrasy in the international creationism issue. State politics and cultural identification may play as large a role as conservative Christianity. In Italy, evolution is Marxist. In Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church doesn't like evolution, therefore evolution has to go, even if people are not that involved in the actual Russian Orthodox beliefs. This is particularly true when it comes to Muslim countries, but I will leave that discussion to other speakers. And finally, as in the United States, a powerful and important cultural value prizing fairness, balance, and hearing all sides is misapplied to education and science, and may also increase the tendency to bring religious views or the denigration of evolution into the classroom. Now, clearly, more information about these topics can be found at our website, ncse.com, and I would refer you there. There is a free weekly electronic newsletter that if you click on that button, you will can sign up for. There's no cost for that. Very depressing, but full of good information. If you go to the news link here, you will be taken to this page. If you sort for international under the drop-down menu here, you can find out what's going on internationally and also, of course, in North America. You can also search by year. We are a membership organization, and we do have many European and Canadian and Australian members. We love to have you guys because you're important sources of information for us. We are also on YouTube and Facebook. And I do encourage you to check out our web resources as well as our website. There's Stephen Jay Gould holding the world's best evolutionary bumper sticker, in my opinion. Honk, if you understand punctuated equilibria. As I explained to Steve, you're not going to get a lot of honks, but they're really high quality when you do get them. And if you wish to be my Facebook friend, please go to facebook.com/Eugenie.Scott, because there's a bunch of Eugenie Scott's sites out there. This is mine. This is the real one. This is where I actually update. So I would encourage you to go there instead. And I'm extraordinarily proud that I actually kept this to 30 minutes. You know, I should have translation all the time because I noticed how very deliberately I was speaking. Hope you guys appreciated that. I really worked hard on this. And so therefore, we have lots of time for questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. That was really very informative. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. We have one already here.
So I'm from Hungary, and we have an interesting situation that the major force for anti-evolution is the Hare Krishna movement, or the Center for
Really?
Bhaktivedanta
Institute? Yeah.
Krishna consciousness movement, which is an interesting thing because they do believe that the Earth is very old, and they believe in a reverse evolution type of thing. So we have to use different tactics to against them. That I don't know whether you consider this. This is very strong in Hungary. I don't know what the situation.
That's fascinating that that's strong in Hungary because it's very, very minor in the United States. They had a bit of a blip back in the 90s when they were able to produce a movie, Mysterious Origins of Man. That was basically their view. And in the United States, the anti-evolutionists are the proponents of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which has been the most active. They produce some crank archaeology and some other things. But actually, I think the pillars of denial are very similar. They attack the science, right? So defense of the science is necessary. But it is clearly an ideological opposition. In this case, it's Hindu religious views, their interpretation of the Vedas, which, if you know anything about Hinduism, the concept of time is basically cyclical. So in a sense, evolution shouldn't be a problem. You know, you can have evolution within a cycle, whole shoot match just starts all over again, but hey, you know, it's, well, you got it, it's still a cycle. But they have, I think this actually came more from archaeology than, say, biology or geology. Cremo and what's the other guy? I haven't thought about this in so long. We're looking at some supposedly anomalous archaeological remains, which were things like, you know, human artifacts that were in the wrong strata. Well, you know, archaeologists know that sometimes that happens. Things get reburied, things get intrusive, and it's not a big deal. But because you found, I don't know, a shoe, say, in the Cambrian, that doesn't mean that people lived in the Cambrian, okay? That just means that a shoe got buried in the wrong deposit. But they will interpret that as evidence for people living 500 million years ago, which is highly unlikely. But their view is, it is still a special creationist point of view, in that they believe that the earth is very old, but you know, God still, or whatever gods, specially created living things. But I think you can use, if you understand the pillars of denialism, you can apply those to this situation too. Attack the science, ideological foundation, and I would be interested to hear from you, maybe we can talk during the break, whether they are also arguing the be fair, you know, critical thinking, we should teach more than one. Ha! He says yes. Yay. Works again, works again. Well, thank you for that. I'm very interested to hear that.
Hi, I'm Martin Rundqvist of the Swedish Skeptics. I find the theological aspect of creationism really odd because the relationship between humans and other animals is not a central point in any religion. And it wasn't talked much about before Darwin. It's completely possible to teach Islam and Christianity and not mention whether we were created separately or not. Do you have any idea why this has become so important to them?
It really has to do a lot with the history of religion in the United States. Because in the United States in about the second decade of the 20th century, the 19-teens and the 1920s, second and third decades, was the rise of a particular form of Protestantism called fundamentalism. And this is much more biblical literalist, biblical inerrancy. It's much more of a focus on the words of the Bible. Now, European Christianity didn't go that route. I mean, they kind of got over that several hundred years ago. And you really don't find that kind of hardcore biblical literalism unless it's an import, shall we say, from North American fundamentalist Protestantism, which has come back to, missionize, as it were, some forms of European Christianity. But it's the stress upon the literal truth of the Bible. Therefore, God specially created all of these organisms, and God specially created human beings as well. Now, I mentioned very briefly, and you gave me an illustration, that most of Christian theology, Catholics and other Protestants, don't hold to this biblical literalist view. And as you say, it's perfectly possible to teach evolution, to teach Christianity without bumping into evolution, or without bumping into... But if you think God created in 6 24-hour days and he created everything as we see it today, pine trees are pine trees and barnacles are barnacles, and lions and tigers and bears are lions and tigers and bears, then evolution is going to be a problem for you. So it really does get back to that interpretation of the holy sex. And that, of course, is the situation with the Krishna creationists, too. They are interpreting the Vedas as being literally true.
My name is Catherine de Jong from the Netherlands. The majority of Dutch schools teach evolution theory, so that's not a problem. But there is never a question about it in the national exam at the end of high school to prevent problems. So we teach the theory, but we do not have questions in the exam, if somebody really is religious and opposing to the evolution theory, and he answers the question according to his belief, you can't have that in a national exam and trouble about it. So no questions in the exams about it.
Interesting. What we have found in the U.S. is that if you don't test the kids on it, it doesn't get taught. Unfortunately.
We have another question back there.
My niece is turning 3 this year. At what age should we teach them evolution?
That's a great question.
And can
3 is a little young.
Can you inoculate them against the idea? Because some parts of my family would not teach them evolution.
The issue of what do you teach when. There are three big ideas in evolution. Okay. One is heredity. That stuff gets passed down every generation. You look more like your parents than you look like anybody else. Cats have kittens, dogs have puppies. Dogs don't have kittens. There's sort of a basic heredity thing. You can start dealing with that 5, 6, early elementary. The idea of reproduction. You don't have to go into all the details of the plumbing and how parts get from A to B and all that, but the big ideas of similarity across generation. A second big idea of evolution is time. And that is one of the hardest things, especially for little kids, to grasp. And teachers in elementary school will often have different exercises to try to get across the idea of time by converting time to distance, for example. We did this in Girl Scouts, as a matter of fact. Take a long rope and mark off When did the first birds appear, and when did the first lions appear, or whatever, and sort of try to get an idea that there's been a lot of time. The Earth is very old, the universe is very old. Your own personal history, you know, when were you born, when was your brother born, etc., you know, whatever. Try to get across the idea of time. But keep your expectations low, because it's tough for grown-ups to really grasp deep time. The third big principle of evolution is adaptation, that groups of organisms will adjust to environmental circumstances over a period of time. And in elementary school, there are a lot of activities that teachers do to try to help students understand that idea. There's exercises that you do. You put different kinds of shaped objects. Jelly beans are a big hit. And you give some kids tweezers, some kids spoons, and the bird beaks exercise. You know, what can you pick? You can't pick up toothpicks with a spoon. You know, there's various things that students learn about the shape of bird beaks and the kind of food they eat. You know, there's various things. Protective coloration exercises. You can cut out colored moths and newsprint moths and sprinkle them on newsprint, and the kids have only a couple seconds to walk by the tables and pick up as many moths as they can. You know, simulation of bird predation on wild populations. And you'll find that whatever the background color is, the kids will pick up fewer of those. Okay, so you know, there's very basic kinds of adaptation exercises that are done in elementary school. I think getting those three ideas across in the early grades is very important. And you as parents or uncles and aunts and grandparents can start to help students develop those ideas gradually. I mean, because it takes a while for these ideas to sink in. Then in junior high and high school, you put those ideas together. What happens when stuff is passed on every generation? Heredity, reproduction. What happens when groups of organisms can change over time because of adjusting to environmental circumstances, predation or changes in weather or whatever? And what happens if you do this for a really, really, really long period of time? Well, it's evolution. That's really the core of understanding evolution. So if you understand those three ideas, then when the kids in junior high or high school, it's not such a shock to learn about evolution. Oh yeah, populations change through time. Living things have common ancestors. If they understand the basics, it's not such a radical idea that living things share common ancestry. And if you can only deal with one of those three ideas, deal with heredity. Because if you accept genetics, you're pretty much stuck with accepting evolution if you really understand genetics.
My name is Helge Bergmann from the German Skeptics. Maybe you can help me with a little gap of understanding opposing science and creationism is not fair and is not justified, because science is much, much more. It's starting with astronomy, biology, chemistry, and so on, and evolution is only part of it. It's part of biology even, maybe. So where's the borderline for the creationists? What to accept of the, what I call, as a chemist, I say traditional science, what to accept and what not to accept. But there must be something like the law of gravity. They can't just do away with that. Where's that borderline? Can that be described in an easy way?
I think you make a very good point, and many people believe that because in the United States Christian conservatives or here reject evolution, they therefore reject all of science. And that is not the case. In general, you will find creationists in the United States to be very big fans of science. And Anila Askar is nodding. I think she'll tell us the same thing with Islamic creationism. So it's not a generically anti-science point of view. They want their kids to study science. Science is important. It is specifically an anti-evolution point of view. It's that second pillar. You know, this is an ideological objection to evolution. But I have to take issue with you, and I think one of the responses that we must give to people who reject evolution is that evolution is not just man evolved from monkeys. You know, evolution is not just biology. common ancestry is the heart of biological evolution, but the cumulative change through time that evolution represents is true of geology, it's true of astronomy as well. Evolution really, in the broadest sense, really does cut across all of science. And you really can't pick and choose, because the same principles of science that we have from physics and chemistry and geology run into biology as well. And science is really a seamless web in that sense. So you can't just say, well, everything else evolved, but not humans. Well, everything else in the universe changed cumulatively, but not biology. Well, maybe the stars and planets changed, but God specially created the solar system. Doesn't work that way. It's a package deal.
How are you looking forward to your Mormon president? Which brings me to the question, was the Mormon religion, was its stance on evolution?
The Mormon position on evolution is a very interesting one. I have a former board member of NCSE, wonderful man, and actually he was very active in founding NCSE 30 years ago. And he is a fourth-generation Mormon biology professor at Brigham Young University. Every year he teaches those Mormon kids, evolution happened, living things have common ancestors, humans and apes shared a common ancestor. He teaches evolution as straightforwardly at Brigham Young as they teach it at Harvard or the University of California. This is also true in the geology department at Brigham Young. Now, Mormonism, Latter-day Saints, is a top-down religion. So the pronouncements of the president, or the prophet as they call him, pretty much determines theology, just like pronouncements of the Pope determine the basic theological components of Catholicism. And thus far, the prophet has never said, Mormons cannot accept evolution. So therefore, Mormons are free to make up their own mind on this topic. And you will find that Mormons who have gone to Brigham Young or have are otherwise educated at respectable universities have no problem with evolution. As to the American political campaign, the National Center for Science Education is a 501c3 organization recognized by the Internal Revenue Service, and we don't talk about elections. Has a great deal to do with our nonprofit status, so I will make no comment about that.
Hi, Dr. Scott. Kenny Stanger. I'm a skeptical musician from the States. I was wondering, I admit I don't really understand the complexities of the legal system completely and how precedent works. How much teeth does the Dover decision have with regards to these attempts to change the language in other school districts around the country? Can that serve as a precedent to stop?
Dover, the Kitzmiller versus Dover case, 2005, was over an attempt by a school district in Dover, Pennsylvania, for those of you who don't know, to institute the teaching of intelligent design. And it was, full disclosure here, NCSE advised the plaintiff's legal team, so we won. That might not have been why we won, but we did win, but full disclosure. Yes, the judge decided that it was not constitutional to teach intelligent design. From a precedential standpoint, from the standpoint of legal precedent, that was only a district court decision. It has precedent only in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, which is about this big. But it's an extremely well-written and well-respected decision. So any other district around the country where intelligent design is tested in the courts, there haven't been any, hopefully there won't be any future, but any future test or case of intelligent design, they will cite Kitzmiller versus Dover. And probably what will happen is if a school board member in Nebraska or someplace wants to have its district teaching intelligent design, the legal retainer for that district will probably try to talk them out of it because of Kitzmiller versus Dover, because it's going to be the same case and they'll lose a lot of money. That said, the Kitzmiller case really isn't terribly relevant to the current creationism du jour, if you will. these academic freedom laws that we're seeing popping up all over the country. Those are, they don't mention intelligent design. They don't call for the teaching of intelligent design. They don't mention creationism or religion whatsoever. From the American First Amendment Establishment Clause jurisprudence, they're really smart bills. They're very cleverly written to try to avoid the Establishment Clause, which in our country does not allow public institutions like schools to either advance or inhibit religion. Schools have to be religiously neutral. You cannot have confessional discussions, shall we say, about religion. You can only describe it. So that said, the current rash of bills that we have propose that you teach evolution, but you balance it by teaching the evidence against evolution, or the weaknesses of evolution. One of the phrases they use is a critical analysis of evolution, which sounds perfectly reasonable until you realize that critical analysis means criticize. Okay, it's not really critical analysis. So these bills are written to avoid the First Amendment, to avoid things like Kitzmiller versus Dover. We don't know if they will pass constitutional muster. We have some ideas when eventually these bills are tested in court. You know, certainly our legal advisory committee has got some ideas for how to approach this, but by and large, you know, we're trying to avoid it because these are not, nobody wants to make bad law. And so it's better to try to stop these bills. And basically, there have been something like 40 of these bills proposed over the last 6 or 7 years. And all but 2 of them have been stopped, which isn't a bad record. But we don't even want those 2. So we're working on it. All right, thank you so much.
The World Skeptics Congress, Paranormal, Supernatural, Fringe Science, Pseudoscience, and How It Really Is.
With skeptics.